Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
This week on the pod, well, the Ontario Liberals are looking for a new leader again. Bonnie Crombie steps down. What's next for the Grits?
Another week, another convention. This time it's the NDP meeting in Niagara and voting on the future of Marit Stiles.
Is Doug Ford putting the brakes on speed cameras?
And in your column, my column, I'll look at a debate the NDP will be having about nuclear power.
And my column focuses on the question, should Bonnie Crombie have stayed on as mayor of Mississauga, or was it worth the risk to run for premier?
It's Friday, September 19th, 2025, so let's get to it.
Okay, friends, let's start every episode as we always do. Give me a little sugar there, JMM.
Well,
and for those listening on podcast, we're fist pumping at that moment. When I say I want some sugar, that just because not everybody watches.
There was some speculation last season.
Yeah. Some people listen to this thing. Okay, I'm looking at your T-shirt. We do a T-shirt check-in off the top.
Yes,
and
sir.
Again, for those listening on podcast, it's a blue T-shirt. It's got a circle with a diamond inside it.
Yes.
And it looks like two pyramids on top of one another. One is black, one is yellow. And I haven't got a clue what that stands for.
So this is a reference to an important piece of CanCon from my childhood, the cartoon Reboot, which was one of the first computer-animated TV series. This came after, like, Toy Story, if you remember, the Pixar, one of the first animated
Buzz
feature
and Woody.
films.
I remember that one.
Yes.
Buzz and Woody.
So Reboot was a Canadian-made cartoon, and those of us of a certain vintage remember it very, very fondly. This was another one of those T-shirts that my wife found at Fan Expo earlier this summer. And as it turns out, we will be discussing a reboot of a kind.
Yes. Is
later.
that why you wore that today?
Yeah, well, you got to choose something. And so since the Liberal Party is going through another process of, let's call it renewal, I thought this was an appropriate T-shirt to wear.
Gotcha. Well, it seems that we both like our T-shirts to reflect something important in history.
Yes.
Yours are a little questionable, I have to say, but okay. I'm wearing this T-shirt because 40 years ago this week, a man by the name of Lincoln Alexander was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of the province of Ontario, and it was yet another pioneering moment in Lincoln Alexander's life. He was, first of all, I loved Link because he was from Hamilton. That is number one.
Yes.
Hamilton. I think he was the MP for Hamilton West for the Progressive Conservatives. He was the first black member of Parliament in Canadian history. He was the first black federal cabinet minister in Canadian history. That Joe Clark government of 1979, he was the Labour minister. He was the first black lieutenant governor in Canadian history, 40 years ago this week, having been appointed by the Prime Minister of the day, Brian Mulroney. He was at the middle of a hurricane on Parliament Hill. Everybody remembers the outcome of this hurricane. They don't remember how it started. Okay. What they remember is Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the Prime Minister, looking across the floor of the House of Commons at a member of Parliament and telling that member of Parliament to essentially F off.
Right.
And when they asked him afterwards, why were you using that kind of language in the House of Commons? His response was something like, gentlemen, what is the nature of your thoughts when you say fuddle-duddle?
Yes.
And fuddle-duddle became kind of the line of the decade.
Yes.
And fuddle-duddle was what Pierre Trudeau was saying to Lincoln Alexander. Link was the guy who made the heckle that got Pierre Trudeau so upset that he told him to F off. Anyway, there's a bunch of things around that we should also note. There's a law school at Toronto Metropolitan University that is named after Lincoln Alexander. Those of us of a certain vintage who remember a television program many, many years ago called L.A. Law.
Yes.
Remember that show?
Yes.
Okay, so Lincoln Alexander Law School, they call it L.A. Law. And January 21st, every year, January 21st is Lincoln Alexander Day. And it's about a week after Martin Luther King Day in the United States, so there's that symmetry there. And Link not only was a pioneering person in public life, he was just a fabulous guy. He was just a wonderful, lovely guy. So I got his T-shirt on today.
And if you're ever at Queen's Park, there is a really extraordinary bust of him now in the legislature.
Yeah, as he deserved, because he was such a significant person. I remember when we first started the agenda, this is going back now 20 years, they said to me, okay, we can put some pictures up on the wall in the Bill Davis studio if you like. Who do you want? And I gave them some names of stuff, Bill Davis studio. We should have a picture of Bill Davis. There's another picture of a bunch of ex-premiers. Here's the first ever female elected to the Ontario legislature. And I wanted a picture of Lincoln Alexander. So there was a great shot of Link up on the wall as well.
And we've fulfilled our podcast's obligation to mention Hamilton.
There we go. Check box. And with that, we're off to issue 1. Technically, Bonnie Crombie needed only 50% plus 1 to survive a confidence vote at last weekend's Ontario Liberal annual general meeting. But politically, as it turned out, the number was much higher. Crombie got 57% support and concluded that just wasn't enough for her to continue as leader. She announced her intention to resign the post pending the selection of a new leader at some future date. Okay, let's start with some of the basics here. If you only need 50% plus 1% support to stay on as leader, why did she quit when she got 57?
There's a difference between what the party constitution says, what the black and white text of it says, and what the political reality is. We're talking about the Liberal leader trying to convince other Liberals, literally card-carrying members of the party, people who can give up a weekend to go to a delegated meeting like this, and convince them that they should continue backing the existing incumbent leader. That is different from trying to convince voters in a general election, say, or even trying to convince party members during a leadership contest where, 50% plus 1 is a reasonable threshold for, who should win in those kinds of contests.
Yeah, technically and politically, that's all you need at a leadership convention.
Right. If you're the leader of a party that is happy with your performance, you should be able to expect much more than 50% plus 1 to support you. And if there is a large minority in the party who are saying, no, we don't support you, it is time to go, that's a big problem.
Well, we talked last week, I remember, about Joe Clark, who seems to have set the benchmark for this because we go back again to January of 1983. He's running for the Progressive Conservative Party for the possibility of maintaining his leadership at that time. It was a leadership review. And he got 66.9% support and decided right there in real time at the moment, went to the lectern and said, that's just not enough. And I'm going to resign and we're going to have a leadership convention, which Brian Mulroney ultimately won. That appears to have set a precedent.
Yes.
Is that to say that going forward, well, certainly in the past, but going forward, every leader from now on needs a number that starts with a 7 to keep their job?
I mean, as you say, that does seem to be the precedent we're setting. But I guess I would argue that the number isn't necessarily the most important thing, and it's more what it says about the divisions within the party, right? Bonnie Crombie spent the entire summer trying to rally support to her in advance of the AGM last weekend. She put out various communications emphasizing that she'd learned from the failures in the election, that she was listening to her critics. In recent weeks, her team really pulled out all the stops trying to ensure a very strong result in last weekend's vote, and they didn't get it. There's some very interesting reporting about what they believed they were going to get before the votes were cast, and what they ended up getting was substantially less than that. And I would say even the fact that they fell so short of their own targets is evidence that probably she was not going to do the job very well, right? This is a practical political test, right? Can you get the votes that you think you are going to get in this kind of a contest? And she and her team did not. And I've seen some quotes from people suggesting that she was very badly served by people on her team. There will be much more reporting about that, I'm quite certain. So, on the one hand, you've got a leader who was really struggling to execute the sort of the basics of politics, even just within her own party. And you had a very substantial minority of Liberals who were not quiet about their reservations about her leadership. And they were not going to go away just because she got 57%.
57 wasn't going to get it done. You and I were both there last Saturday at the Sheraton Centre Hotel in downtown Toronto, to watch the proceedings and to listen to her speech. And I know we were both all over the floor talking to delegates and trying to gauge how much support there was in the room for her. I can tell you, I was running into a lot of people who were refusing to tell me how they intended to vote.
Yes.
And that is always a sign that it's not good for the existing leader.
Yes.
And but mind you, I talked to her people and they were adamant that they were going to get at least 70% support. I talked to one person who said, mark me down for 80%. I think she's got this nailed. At the end of the day, clearly they overestimated their organizational skills. But I don't know. What were you picking up?
Well, so like you, I had people who didn't want to tell me, and then the people who were very happy to tell me were the people who said that they were voting against her. I can't remember whether the question was phrased that voting yes was for
no,
review.
no means no to review.
Right.
No means we like Bonnie.
Yeah.
Yes means we want to review. We want Bonnie out. So it's a bit of a, it's opposite to what you would expect.
Yes. So the people who were happy to tell me how they voted were people who had voted yes and had voted for the review. So again, a bad sign for the leader. I got the sense that Crombie's team, even the people who I did not meet anybody who was bold enough to predict 80%, but even the people who acknowledged that that this could be tight, what they hoped for was that they could get enough time for a by-election somewhere to be called in the GTA, that Bonnie Crombie could run in, win her seat, and that would silence her critics. But I mentioned before, like the critics in her party were not going anywhere. This minority of people who opposed her all summer since the election results, they were not going anywhere. And I'm thinking of John Tory here, right? Who also, like Joe Clark, won 66.9% of a leadership review vote, vowed to run in a by-election afterwards, but then he failed to win that seat in what was a very winnable Tory seat.
Very safe. Halliburton, Kawartha, Lakes Brock, I think was the seat.
But he failed to win because Tory voters stayed home, and the Liberals ended up winning that seat, if I recall correctly. So there was no guarantee that even if Crombie had stayed on as leader, and I think we should emphasize that it really was her choice to leave, in that sense of like there was no mechanism in the party to force her out after winning that 57%. Even if she had stuck around, I think it was far from guaranteed that she'd have any kind of happy future, if I could put it that way.
No, that's the problem. The problem is when you get 57% support and you say, well, I've met the threshold, I'm staying, you've got 43% of the party that is unsheathing its knives and going after you for the next period of time. So, yeah, she could have looked forward, I'm sure, to quite a miserable time. As you consider the state of the Ontario Liberals today, I think it's, I'm afraid, worth putting on the record that this party, in 158 years of Confederation, has never been worse off. They have finished third in the last 3 consecutive elections. That has never happened before. The last 2 leaders of this party, Stephen Del Duca and Bonnie Crombie, were unable to win seats during the general election. That has never happened before. If you are a provincial Liberal in Ontario these days, what gives you optimism?
I think a fair assessment of Crombie's legacy as leader will say that she left the Liberal Party better than she found it. They are an official party again. They have 14 seats in the legislature. That matters for reasons we have talked about on the podcast before. It matters for prominence. It matters for money. The Liberals did indeed get shortchanged by the electoral system. They are third in the seat count, but they were second in the popular vote. They really did make a strong showing in the last election, got about 30% of the popular vote. And at the Sheraton last weekend, I don't know about you, but I was struck by how many young faces I saw in those halls. The number of people wearing, they had these little pins, I think they were yellow, saying "My First AGM." That's a good sign for a political party, right? If young faces are coming out, if people who were not previously engaged in the party are coming out. And again, I really want to stress, it was a beautiful weekend, and these people opted to spend their time in windowless conference rooms in the basement of a hotel in downtown Toronto.
Listening to seminars about how to run good campaigns, and do you want to run for second associate vice president of Paperclips at the, anyway, yeah,
exactly.
They're dedicated, for sure.
Exactly, right? So, I think if you are a Liberal, there are some good signs here. There is some positive energy for the party. Obviously, ditching a leader is never a comfortable process, and at least some people in the caucus were genuinely backing Crombie, so they are going to be dealing with that. I don't think it is guaranteed, but I do think it's also possible that this new leadership race that they are about to go into will sometimes they can be ugly and you leave the party worse off than it was going into it. But it is also possible for the leadership race to bring that energy, bring new money into the party, bring more prominence, that kind of thing. The things that the Liberals hoped that the last leadership race would do. So, we will see how they come out of this coming leadership race.
Yeah, and I think we should also put on the record the fact that I think that was the largest annual general meeting the Ontario Liberals have ever
they've
had.
been saying.
Yeah, in terms of the number of people who showed up. And apropos of the last point you made, yeah, these leadership conventions. I mean, if it's a I hate to put it this way, but if it's a relatively dull affair where not very many people run for the job, and maybe they're all in caucus right now, that's one potential outcome. Another potential outcome is that you get a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and from a variety of occupations contesting the leadership, and it actually kind of jazzes things up a bit and brings some much needed attention to what is, after all, still the third place party. So, okay, you and I have both been sort of keeping our ear to the ground right now. What are you hearing in terms of names kicking the tires on this thing?
Well, I think any list, you've got to start with Nate Erskine-Smith, Beaches East York MP, who ran in 2023, came in second behind Crombie. The core of the opposition to Crombie in this most recent vote included a lot of Nate Erskine-Smith supporters. He was swearing up and down that he was not deliberately setting out to force a redo of the leadership vote. So
he didn't even show up to the meeting.
He was there on Saturday. I did speak to him.
He wasn't there on Sunday. He said, I'm going to the Jays game.
Okay, well, fair. So Nate Erskine-Smith is I don't think he has actually publicly stated whether he will run again, but I think he's on everybody's list. Other people who have been named, Jeff Lehman, the former mayor of Barrie, current chair of Muskoka region. I think we've spoken about him before. He is He ran for the Liberals in 2022 and very, very narrowly lost to Attorney General Doug Downey, a few hundred votes, maybe even.
Yeah, it was tight.
And he considered running for the leadership in 2023 and then decided not to because of some family concerns.
Let me just put a quick word in about him because Jeff Lehman is getting a lot of attention, in part because he has been a mayor, and a lot of people who have run a city are able to move up to provincial politics, but also because he represents a part of the province that the Liberals need to do better in if they're going to come back. They can't only be a Toronto and Ottawa party.
Yes.
They've got to show that they've got some strength in other parts of Ontario, central Ontario, right? Like if they could make some indentations there. Anyway, that would be very useful for them. I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. Some of the other names and these are all more speculative, I would say right now. Karina Gould, the Burlington MP, obviously ran for the federal leadership that Mark Carney ended up winning, but I think she got a lot of attention in that race, and I've been hearing her name for months now from other Liberals. She has put out a statement saying that, right now, she's focused on federal politics.
Wait till her phone starts ringing.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
phone's going to ring. Karina Gould, your phone's going to ring. I'm telling you.
If it has not been ringing already.
It has, yeah.
Let's name some members of the current caucus, right? Adil Shamji, he also ran in 2023. He dropped out and endorsed Crombie. Ted Shue, Kingston and the Islands, he ran and he stayed in the race all the way to the convention. Stephanie Bowman, the finance critic, like Shamji, currently has a seat, like Shamji and Shue. They have seats in the legislature. And this is one of those issues where I feel like the Liberals keep flip-flopping on how important the leader having a seat in the legislature actually is, where, twice now they have chosen a leader who did not have a seat in the legislature, and they always tell themselves, oh, well, it's not that big a deal. There's lots of other ways to get attention. And then it turns out that it's kind of like you're constantly trying to climb uphill to get media attention because there are no clips of you in question period. And then after a disappointing election result, everybody says, oh, gosh, maybe the leader should have had a seat in the legislature after all. We'll see which concern wins the day in the coming leadership race. A former federal MP, Navdeep Bains, who comes out of Peel Region, was very active in this current leadership review vote, or this just past leadership review vote, I should say. And Andrew Buzari, a Toronto area MD, it might sound like it's a bit out of nowhere, except that he's a very prominent speaker on all sorts of public health issues. Like many doctors, became very prominent during COVID, and he was actually. His name was polled by I would say, a liberal-aligned pollster earlier this summer in the context of all of this leadership review, and he did surprisingly well. So he is apparently being seriously approached by people to run in this coming race.
The issue of a seat, let's just spend a little bit of time on that. And I want to be, people often ask me when you go to these conventions, what do you think? Does the leader really have to have a seat? And I want to be consistent about this because I've always been of the view that the seat doesn't matter. Now, I know some people think I'm nuts for saying that the last two examples of the Ontario Liberal leaders not having a seat didn't turn out well.
Yeah.
But, I look to history as a guide in these kinds of things. Ernie Eves won a leadership convention in 2002. He did not have a seat. He then ran in a by-election and got a seat. He became the first premier, I think, in nearly 100 years to become premier without a seat on the legislature, so that's doable. I mean, we don't have to go back that far, friends. Mark Carney did not have a seat,
exactly, yes.
and only got about 90% of the vote at his convention, then picked a good seat to run in and won his seat in the ensuing federal election. So, no, you don't have to have a seat. On the other hand, John Tory won the leadership of the Ontario PC Party in 2006 or 7 or something, and he did not have a seat. He eventually got somebody to stand down. He won a by-election, but then contested a different seat and lost that seat. It all depends on where you run. You got to run somewhere where you really know you can win. And so I'm going to say, for sure, the Stephanie Bowmans, the Ted Shoes, the Adel Shamjis who have seats right now, that certainly is a check mark in their column for those people who really care about this kind of thing. But I would hate to think that it's a disqualifying feature, meaning that if there are good people out there who are interested in trying to bring this party back to some semblance of legitimacy, and you don't happen to have a seat right now, but you think you can win one, and you ultimately you prove you can win a seat, well, why would we want to exclude them? That'd be my take anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a difference between, the theoretical question of does somebody need to have a seat in the legislature, and what we actually saw happen with Bonnie Crombie, where there was questions about would she run in Milton or would she run in a different seat, and then even in the run-up to the election earlier this year, there was an attempt by the Liberal Party to try and disguise which seat she would run in. They were hoping to keep the Tories off guard, and that didn't work. And I think if the next Liberal leader is not does not have a seat in the legislature already, I would say maybe don't get too cute about it and just run in the first seat you genuinely think you've got a shot at, because if it gets drawn out like that, it doesn't turn out well.
Let's put one more thing on the record here. And you and I talk about the fact that we don't like when politics gets really gross and disgusting and people make personal attacks and insults against one another. So I want to state for the record that I was pleased to see the Premier of Ontario's office put out a statement after Bonnie Crombie announced her intention to resign. And that was from Doug Ford, thanking Crombie for her many years of public service as a member of Parliament, as a mayor, and as a party leader. He acknowledged the personal sacrifices that are involved when people take on the leadership of a party. He would know that as well as anybody. And he also wished her all the best in the next chapter of her life. Now, I got to tell you, friends, that's how it's done. You be classy. When somebody goes through a very difficult defeat like that, you don't pile on, you be classy. So good for you, Doug Ford, and your people for being classy there. Let me also put on the record that they did spend millions of dollars demonizing her and defining her faults before she was frankly able to tell the people of Ontario who she was and what she stood for. But that's all part of the fun and games of politics, and that's all fair. And
NFL rules.
Absolutely. NFL, more like, what's that thing in the octagon?
UFC rules.
UFC, more like UFC rules. But we expect that. That's part of the campaign of ideas. What Ford did after Crombie made her announcement was the right thing to do, and I was glad that it was done.
Actually, one thing is just occurring to me now. I have to wonder what is going to happen with the amalgamation and disamalgamation and reamalgamation of Peel Region. Now that the former mayor of Mississauga is no longer one of the primary contenders for Doug Ford's job, do they go back to the promise that Doug Ford made to Hazel McCallion?
On her deathbed, no less.
Exactly. So I have no idea what the answer to that question is, but I will be watching with interest.
The answer is my head hurts trying to keep up with all that.
Yes.
With that, let's get off to issue 2. Last weekend, it was Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie's date with destiny, and this weekend, it is Marit Stiles' turn. The NDP leader, who's also the leader of His Majesty's loyal and official opposition, will put her leadership to the judgment of her party members. JMM, you want to set this up for us?
Right. So the NDP, like the Liberals, require a leader who was unsuccessful in forming government to face a leadership review. We've talked quite a bit about the disappointments for Bonnie Crombie and the Liberal Party in the last election, but it is worth saying here that by a lot of objective metrics, the NDP really did do worse in the last election, right? They came in third in the vote count, in the popular vote. They did much better in the seat count because of the vagaries of first past the post.
They have a very efficient vote, which very few votes translated into quite a few seats.
Yes. But there has not been, I would say, as much anger directed at Marit Stiles, and it certainly has not been anywhere near as organized as the opposition to Bonnie Crombie was within the Liberal Party. So everybody I've spoken to expects her to easily clear that 70% threshold, for example, that we've been talking about. She does not seem to face a really serious threat to her leadership. Nevertheless, we will be paying attention. She speaks to the party on Saturday, and then they will vote after that. Not entirely clear to me at this moment when exactly we expect to learn the results of the vote, but as I say, not expecting a ton of drama on that specific issue, which isn't to say that there won't be some interesting things happening at this convention. I mistakenly referred to it as another AGM to a New Democrat, and they were like, actually, it's our biennial meeting. So, okay, I put that on the record.
Right. Yeah.
So just because there is not a provincial NDP leadership campaign in the offing, or at least not likely, does not mean that there is not one happening federally right now, right? Jagmeet Singh resigned leadership after the very disappointing results of the federal NDP earlier this year. So I am told that numerous federal NDP candidates will be in attendance at this nominally only in the Ontario Provincial Party. They will be there to have their faces out in public, to meet and greet and welcome any support that people want to offer to their campaigns.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you want to be in the conversation for the federal leadership, you should show up to the Ontario NDP convention.
Yep.
What are we calling it? Biennial convention?
Biennial meeting.
Biennial meeting, yeah.
Yes.
You should definitely show up to that because you want the media to notice you there and to write about the fact that you were there so that New Democrats across the country can see that you're in it to win it.
Yep, absolutely. And there are two sort of lightning rods that I think we'll be looking at. One, and I think this is just perennial now in progressive politics, certainly, I'll be interested to see what, if any, kind of attention the Israel-Palestine issue gets. Obviously, this was very acute in the last legislature with Sarah Jama elected as a New Democrat and then removed from caucus because of some things that she said regarding the war in Gaza. And Jama still has supporters within the NDP who felt like that she was not very well treated by the leader of the party. So if there's any kind of serious attempt to organize opposition to Marit Stiles, I kind of expect it to be along that axis. But there are other questions to ask about the NDP, and one of the big ones that I think is really interesting right now is the NDP's future with private sector unions. Mm-hmm. Right, NDP still very strong with public sector unions, and certainly some private sector unions, like the heart of the party is still steelworkers and Hamilton and Sudbury, right? But we've seen the progressive conservatives do very well among private sector construction trades in particular. We just saw the union LIUNA just left the Ontario Federation of Labour in part because of disagreements with the broader labor movement, if I could put it that way.
And that LIUNA stands for Labor's International Union of North America.
Yes.
They are big.
They're very, very big. Actually, I mean, there's a whole other thing of tracing the history of LIUNA in the last few years where they initially backed the Ford Tories in 2018 in part because of a really weird tiny change to the law that the Liberals made.
Well, partly that, and partly they didn't like Stephen Del Duca.
Well, yes.
They had a real mad-on for him.
Well, so yeah, this was it. In Stephen Del Duca got a change made to the law in 2018. LIUNA, because Stephen Del Duca came out of the Carpenters Union, LIUNA backed the Ford government, and then in 2022, I think the leader of LIUNA said something like, we will do absolutely everything we can to defeat the Liberals if Stephen Del Duca is the leader.
And they did.
And they did.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I will be watching for and seeing what kind of developments come out of this meeting.
Let me make two additional points here. Number one, I think it's fair to say that the expectations of new Democratic Party delegates and the expectations of Liberal Party delegates are different.
Yes.
Bonnie Crombie got elected in part because she was able to make enough Liberal delegates believe that she had a shot at winning that election, which she ultimately did not have, but she certainly convinced enough people that she had a shot at it. And after all, nobody'd won 3 straight majorities in 70 years, so it didn't seem like such a idle boast. How do I put this nicely? The New Democrats have won one election.
Yes.
In
Ever.
history.
Yes.
Ever. Right. Like 1 out of 44 elections they have won. So New Democratic Party supporters don't necessarily apply the same test to their leader that Liberal delegates put to their leader. And in fact, I can recall after a 3rd consecutive election loss by the previous leader, Andrea Horwath, she submitted herself to a leadership review by her party and still got a number starting with a 7.
Yeah.
Right? She had still got almost three quarters, I think, of NDP supporters endorsing her leadership despite the fact that she had lost 3 consecutive elections. So very different expectations, which is another one of the reasons why you and I believe Marit Stiles is not going to have any difficulty sailing through this thing this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, events could surprise us, but I don't expect it. And I think there's also a sense in which the party, and I think both the Liberals and the NDP kind of see the last election as such a weird confluence of events that they are not judging Stiles on like the on the harshest curve, if I could put it that way. If she does not do very well in the next election, 4 years from now probably, then I don't know. If the NDP keep losing support, keep losing seats, right? Then I would expect her to be in more trouble then.
Long way to go before that.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, we're off to issue 3. The City of Vaughn, just north of Toronto, has passed a motion to stop the use of its speed enforcement cameras, which since April have produced 32,000 speeding tickets. Some have called it a knee-jerk reaction, attempting to appease Doug Ford, who has a well-known disdain for these devices. JMM, the deets, if you would.
Absolutely. So yes, Premier Doug Ford has made it extremely clear that he is not a fan of these speed cameras. He calls them a tax grab and has said that he hopes municipalities will remove them. And if they do not, the provincial government may act in their stead. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario disagrees and has written Doug Ford about this, saying that the speed cameras, played an important role in public safety. And AMO referred particularly to a study from the Hospital for Sick Children that shows these cameras keep people safe by significantly reducing speeds on roads.
Let's make a distinction here. The City of Vaughn is a city within the region of York.
Yes.
Vaughan may be doing one thing with its cameras, but the region of York's cameras are still going. What do you think a couple things here, I guess.
Yeah.
What's behind Doug Ford's disdain for the cameras? Because as we know, and I know you don't do as much driving in a car as I do, but I can tell you, everybody knows this from experience, when you drive a car and they have the signs up saying municipal speed camera enforcement in place, you drive slower.
Yes.
You just do.
Yes.
I've talked to cab drivers, for example, or Uber drivers who, have done 43 in a 40 and received a speeding ticket for doing that. They result in fewer accidents. They result in fewer deaths. They raise funds for municipalities. So what's the problem?
So the Premier has referred to them as a tax grab or a cash grab. This is, of course, a common complaint by motorists. You mentioned getting a ticket for 43 in a 40 zone. I think there's absolutely a fair question to raise about the transparency of how these cameras are set up and how they operate. I am the resident bike riding communist on this podcast. But even I will admit that, something feels wrong about, ticketing somebody for doing 43 in a 40, right?
Agreed.
Now, I also happen to, I take my kid to a school every weekday morning where people regularly blow through stop signs and, are speeding on the street nearby. So I definitely want some enforcement, and I don't mind people getting tickets for it. But zooming out here, I just find this very difficult to parse philosophically, right? Like the Premier's opposition to bike lanes at least has the stated public purpose of reducing congestion, right? Fines are how we have collectively decided to enforce the speed limits on our roads, right? Speed cameras do that enforcement, and they do it cheaply and more effectively than having human police in cruisers sitting there with radar guns all day, right? I get people grumbling about the tickets, I really do. And as I say, I'm sympathetic to the idea that we should be transparent about, how they're set up and how they're operated. And the government was saying, at least a few months ago, that's what they were looking for, was they were going to use some regulations to improve transparency and accounting. I didn't get the sense that they were going to get rid of speed cameras wholesale. It's very odd to me that the head of His Majesty's government is complaining that the law is being enforced too comprehensively and too well,
Well, I think part of the reason this has become such a thing is, and I don't know what the number is, maybe but in the West End of Toronto, in High Park,
yeah.
Citizens have taken it upon themselves to knock down those enforcement cameras. How many times?
It's
6,
at least
7,
7 or 8 at this point.
Yeah, it's a lot. So there are people who believe that these things are just unjust to have, or certainly to have them there and set them at 43.
Yeah.
You want to have them and set them at 53. Maybe we can have a discussion about that. But it does raise the question, if not speed cameras, then what?
So there aren't that many ways to effectively reduce the speeds that cars move on the road, right? As you and I have both experienced, right? With speed cameras really do slow down people consistently. The only other one that I'm aware of, the only other strategy that I'm aware of that works consistently is changing the physical design of the street itself to slow drivers down. The thing is, the Premier hates that stuff too. So, like, if we're talking about, putting in bollards and speed bumps or bike lanes are also a way of slowing down traffic, and the Premier definitely does not want that. So, this is one of those cases where I need somebody to tell me what means exactly we are willing to contemplate to compel drivers to drive safely on our streets. And I would just reiterate that is the point here, that speeding, particularly in city streets, can be very dangerous. And the government has a public purpose here of trying to slow drivers down and improve public safety. And we got to do something to do that because we don't have a lot of options left.
No, and we don't want the roads to be dangerous.
No, exactly.
So there we go. Okay, we are going to speed off to our next segment, which is Your Column, My Column. Time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns that we wrote and that you can read on the TVO website, tvo.org. We wrote them over the past week. JMM, what tickled your fancy this week?
Well, so I am going to look ahead to another thing in the NDP biennial meeting that I didn't mention in our main segment because I was saving it for this. The NDP are looking at revising their position on nuclear power. They have had a plank in their official sort of party policy book for many years, basically saying that they would only support nuclear power if, and they list a litany of conditions about, the safety of nuclear waste and the safety of nuclear plant operations.
They're basically against it.
Yes, basically, it's not explicitly like we oppose nuclear power, but instead they say we only support nuclear power if you can do X, Y, and Z, and it's quite extensive. Yes, apologies. At least I didn't say lieutenant governor.
There you go.
So there's an interesting move to change that language to something more permissive, more open to nuclear power by the NDP. And it is coming out of the New Democrats youth wing. And I spoke with one of the people who is responsible for moving this motion forward through the party apparatus. It's going to be debated this weekend. And they are... It's not purely like a generational divide within the party, but it is a generational divide within, I think, progressive politics and in the environmental movement more broadly, right? Like if you got into environmentalism in the 70s and 80s at the heyday of Greenpeace and anti-nuclear activism, you have a very strong opinion about nuclear power and the proper role it plays in environmental policy, which is basically just no. Right? Whereas younger people who are more coming to environmentalism more often from a climate perspective, how do we lower emissions from our energy use fastest perspective, they are frequently, not always, but frequently much more positive on nuclear power. And so I want to talk a bit about that. And also, some of the odd divisions within the NDP on this, where it is just the case that in Ontario anyway, like nuclear power is overwhelmingly publicly owned. It's very heavily unionized, and some of these nuclear plants exist in parts of the province where the NDP wouldn't mind winning some seats. So it's kind of odd in that sense that the NDP were so skeptical to hostile to nuclear power for so long, but that seems to be changing. And how about you?
My column goes back to the events of last weekend where the Ontario Liberals gathered and decided not to give Bonnie Crombie much of an endorsement. And I got to tell you, JMM, I was hearing so much negativity both at the actual convention and then in the days afterwards that I had so many people saying to me, she did such a dumb thing to leave her job that she could have had forever as mayor of Mississauga, and then she failed to win an election, she failed to win a seat, she failed to do this, she failed to do that. And I just thought, I want to think about how these kinds of decisions often go and whether they were worth making. And in doing so, I remember thinking back, this is 23 years ago now, Ernie Eves, the former finance minister for Mike Harris during the Common Sense Revolution, he left public life after a really good run, I would have to say. Whether you liked his policies or didn't, he had a successful run as a Minister of Finance and as a member of the Ontario Legislature. Took a job on Bay Street, which paid him north of $1 million a year. But then when Mike Harris stepped down and retired, there were a number of people who, as the saying goes, started to make his phone ring, and he decided to answer the call of his party and his province and come back into public life in order to win a convention which allowed him to be premier for precisely 1 year and 190 days, after which he was defeated by Dalton McGuinty. Yeah. That decision to leave private life to come back into public life cost Mr. Eves millions of dollars. And at the end of the day, he didn't get to be premier for even 2 years. And the question has often been asked, was it worth doing? And in fact, I had an interview with him for a series we're doing called The Premier Files here on TVO. You will see these on Friday nights over the next little while. And I asked him that question, was it worth doing? And he said, of course it was worth doing. There have been 26 premiers in the history of the province of Ontario in 157 years, and I'm one of them. And I got to do what I thought was best for the people of Ontario during that time I had the job. So did it cost him a lot of money? Yeah. Was it worth doing? Yeah. I took that same thinking and I applied it to the Crombie situation. Yes, she could have maintained the job maybe even as long as Hazel McCallion had it, right? I mean, she could have had that job for a very long time. So was it a mistake to leave? Well, I suspect Bonnie Crombie today is thinking, yeah, it was a mistake. It didn't work out for me. Yeah. But my hunch is the more time goes on, and after the hurt and disappointment of the weekend convention dissipates a bit, she will say to herself, I gave it a shot. Yeah. and I don't regret giving it a shot. And I remember some advice that former Premier Bob Rae gave to Ernie Eves as he was thinking about whether to come back to public life. And that advice was, Ernie, and surprisingly enough, one a Democrat, one a Tory, but good friends. Bob Rae's advice was, Ernie, I've never regretted the decisions I made. It was the decisions I didn't make that I have occasionally regretted. And my hunch is Bonnie Crombie is going to get to that place eventually, where she doesn't think to herself, boy, that was dumb. I never should have left the mayoralty. I think she will think, I'm glad I gave it a shot because I'd never want to live my whole life thinking, what if?
Yeah. No, I think, one of the things that she can look back on over the last few years, no, she did not get to be an MPP. She did not get to be premier. But being a leader of a major political party in Ontario does come with its own benefits, right? She contested an election. She got to see parts of this province that I imagine she never thought she would necessarily see a lot of as mayor of Mississauga. And, you meet tons of different people, and it fundamentally changes your perspective on this place that we live in.
And you know what? She's got an elderly mother, and for a day, she was queen of the province for a day, right? She won a convention, and her mother was able to watch that happen.
Yeah.
Which, not a bad thing.
No, not nothing. So, yeah, no, I like you, I hope that after the hurt of the most recent events passes, I hope she can appreciate all the positives as well.
Amen. Okay, let's finish off going to the mailbag. As we do every week, if you've got a burning question or insightful comment, we love to hear from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, get us going here.
Right, so we have an email here from listener Conan Hoy in Ottawa who writes, Hi, Steve and John. Thank you so much for your podcast. My question is, taxpayers are being asked to subsidize liquefied natural gas exports. Won't increasing natural gas exports increase the domestic costs of natural gas that we use to heat our homes? Sorry if that is a semi-federal question. It is, kind of, but we'll let it go. It does tie to the province paying for natural gas expansion in Ontario. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by increasing our domestic reliance on a product which is cheap now, only to have the price increase when exports take off? Once again, that's from Conan Hoy in Ottawa.
Very reasonable question. Conan linked us to the Access to Natural Gas Act of 2018, which is looking to hook up at least 9,000 more people across Ontario's northern, remote, and Indigenous communities onto the grid by the year 2028. Already, 3.6 million homes and 160,000 businesses use gas in the province. That ain't nothing. If exports do take off because of Mark Carney's so-called nation-building efforts, could we be paying more for gas in the future?
So the short answer is yes. I'll just get that out of the way. And this is a really important change in energy markets that I think it might not be obvious to people. So, for many, many years, we didn't export natural gas off of North America, or at least not in very large volumes. And so it didn't really matter what was happening in Europe or Asia, just in terms of the price of natural gas, right? It was primarily determined by how much was being made in Texas and the Midwest, and what consumers were willing to pay. But that was all internal to North America. Ever since the shale boom of the U.S., and they now have become a large oil and gas exporter, and they're building a ton of new natural gas export plants, the North American market is now going to be much more closely tied to global consumers. So if Europe wants to buy up a lot of natural gas and they're willing to pay more to get it, which because of recent events regarding Russia and where it likes to put its soldiers, the Europeans are paying more. So yes, we are going to see the cost of natural gas in Canada and in Ontario go up. We are already seeing some of this in action, right? Enbridge, the company that has the monopoly on natural gas distribution in Ontario, they are talking about cost increases to the tune of something like $190 for the average Ontario family consumer. So, that's not the most massive sum, but it's not chump change either for a lot of families.
Right on. Okay, you want to give the email address one more time and get out of here?
Once again, if you'd like to ask about any questions on our show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org. We normally focus on provincial jurisdiction, but we will allow some federal matters as well.
There we go. Okay, that is the onpoli podcast for this Friday, September 19th, 2025. I should add the 5th anniversary of the death of former Prime Minister John Turner.
Okay.
I like to put that on the record, mostly because I wrote a book about the guy and I miss him. There we go.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it. Good, bad, or indifferent, which was John Turner's line. I never comment on polls. Good, bad, or indifferent. That's where I stole it from. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org and be sure to include your first, last name, and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks, as always, to our studio crew for the makeshift job that we are doing here. They're redoing the Bill Davis studio downstairs on the main floor, so we're up here on the 5th floor of 2180. David, Teasy, thank you for being up here with us. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.